Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance for our program is provided by the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Oklahoma summers are heating up this year. Today on Oklahoma Gardening, we've got a couple of drought-tolerant plants that we're bringing to you. Wes Lee shares just how hot it's really been this summer. And we've got a few tips for gardeners on how to protect yourself from the sun and the heat. It's almost like an ombre of sunset colors. It's not the flowers, right? I've got another great drought-tolerant plant I want to share with you. This is called gray Santolina. We have it growing here in our rock garden because it does like good rocky and good drainage soils. So you can see here, it's got that gray foliage, and usually that's kind of a telltale sign of a plant that is drought tolerant. And so it can handle our Oklahoma heats and sometimes those drier soil conditions that we might experience as we head into those summer months. Now the foliage itself actually kind of reminds me of an Arizona cypress. It's kind of got that grayish green color that it brings to the garden landscape. And you can see up close it has kind of a fuzzy texture to it. What's unique about this is it actually, the species comes from the Greek word meaning dwarf cypress, so it doesn't surprise me that it sort of reminds me of the Arizona cypress. And you can see how it kind of spreads. It'll create these kind of rolling mounds of this sort of like a cloud-like effect in your landscape. Now in late spring, it also will put up these flower buds. Now these flower buds, while it is in the Asteraceae family and they look like kind of like the little buds or the eyes of a daisy, that's because they are sort of that eye of the daisy or the eye of the mum, because they lack the ray florets that you often see around the mum or the daisy. Instead, they just have these button-like flowers that sort of polka dot the landscape. But that contrast between the bright yellow and the gray foliage makes a nice addition to any landscape. Now, if you're not really interested in the gray color in your landscape, there also is a green Santolina to check out. Both of these are hardy from zone 6 to 10, and again, a great addition in any Oklahoma garden.
Hello, I'm Wes Lee, and it's great to be back on Oklahoma Gardening again to visit about Oklahoma Mesonet. We have multiple sensors on our towers across the state, but one of the most important sensors that people look at is air temperature. We tend to be one of the hottest states in the country in the summertime, so air temperature is something a lot of people look at every day. Our air temperature monitors look similar to this. There is a thermostat that fits inside this canister. Temperature is always taken in the shade at a height of 2 meters, which would be about 6.5 feet. The summer times in Oklahoma, as you know, get really hot, but this year we seem to be running a little bit above normal for the last several months. In fact, May, June, both come in about 3 or 4 degrees above normal for this time of year over what would be expected during the long-term average. In the last 30 days, we've only spent about 2 days below what would be normal for this time of year. Unfortunately, the forecasts for the next multiple weeks look very similar, hotter than normal and drier than normal. Are we on a record pace to be one of the hottest years in this century? Probably not, but we're going to be relatively hot compared to some of the other years. 2011 and 2012 came in as our two hottest years in recent term. We have one of our maps on the website that shows the number of days above 100 degrees that each of our 120 sites have encountered. This year, our hottest site to date has been Altus, with well over a month or 30 plus days of above 100 degrees. In 2012, that was about the same number as what we've encountered this year, but in 2011, it was about 50% hotter from the first of the year till the midsummer as we're in right now. We don't expect a break in temperatures anytime soon. In fact, I don't see any forecast numbers below the average temperature that we expect for this time of year. Temperatures are one thing to deal with Oklahoma, but added to that is the humidity levels that we normally encounter in the summer months. Anytime we have a high humidity level, that tends to add a few degrees to the felt temperature that Oklahomans feel when they're outside. Our heat indexes this summer have been running well into the triple digits pretty much statewide every day for a couple of weeks now. There is another index that we like to promote at the Oklahoma Mesonet called wet bulb globe temperature risk. I know it's a long name and we wish it would be renamed, but it's a great set of data that helps you determine how heat is going to impact humans. Anytime this wet bulb globe temperature risk moves into the reds or blacks on the map, then heat-related illness is likely to happen if you don't take precautions when you're outside. So avoid those days outside when we're in the black category, which is the worst category on that map. And if you do have to work outside, limit your times and drink plenty of fluids while you're out there. One other important temperature number that impacts especially vegetable producers in the state is the nighttime temperatures. Our nighttime temperatures have always or also exceeded what is normal for this time of year. The record highest temperature for the low, I know that's confusing, but the record highest low temperature was 89 degrees, also set, I believe, in 2011 in Stillwater. We have been running into the mid-70s this year, or this summer to date, and that's just too hot for things like tomato blooms to be able to set. We'd like to see those nighttime temperatures drop below 70 or at least into the low 70s to get good fruit set on some of those crops that need pollination. To access the temperature data on the Mesonet site, you can use a mobile app for either the Android or Apple phones, or you can go to our website at mesonet.org and all of the weather data is available.
As you can tell today, we are not in a garden. We are actually over here at the Tandy Medical Building, and joining me is Dr. Chronister. Dr. Chronister, thank you so much for having us here.
Absolutely.
So people are probably wondering, what is a gardening show doing here in a medical facility? But I wanted to talk to you specifically about gardeners and the sun exposure that they might get.
Oh, yes.
It's extreme this year.
It is extreme, and the heat's extreme as well as the humidity.
Absolutely. So, and those can affect our body differently. Like we could have some lower temperatures, but that humidity could really impact us. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So when I think a lot of us know what it feels like to be in the heat, right? And that our bodies need a lot of water. We can talk about hydration here in a minute, but whenever we're in the heat, we lose a lot more water quickly, right? Okay. However, when we're in the humidity, it creates that kind of stickiness, you know, as opposed to just that the sweat drying off of you, which is exactly what you need to cool off.
Right. It feels like you got a rag over your face.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And when we think about like sports clothing, we always see stuff that's like water wicking. Well, because we don't want that water to stay on us, because the longer that water stays on us and the stickier we are, actually that water heats up and it's harder to overcome. So our body actually has to work a lot harder to cool us down in that sticky, humid temperatures.
Okay, so while it might be great for plants, it's not so good on gardeners.
It is not so great on gardeners, no.
So let's talk, we hear a lot about heat stress and heat stroke. Kind of go through some of those symptoms that we might see and what we need to do. So
both are actually very common. And I think a lot of times people have had heat stroke and they didn't even recognize what it was or what was happening to them. So when we're talking about that heat exhaustion, that's a feeling of just kind of fatigue. And I always describe it as you feel like you're moving through mud a little bit. And you think, oh, I just must be tired. You might start having some muscle cramps. You might have a little bit of a headache. Or you might get kind of lightheaded when you've been down in the plants and then you stand back up and go, ooh, getting a little lightheaded. That's when you're getting that heat exhaustion. Now, when we've moved into heat stroke, it is that throbbing headache, often nausea, vomiting. Our heart rate is going very, very quickly and temperature is quite high. So we're talking temperatures about 103 because our bodies can't control it. So it's very important that that person gets cooled down. If at any point someone loses consciousness during that, you need to get them to a hospital. If you know that you're going to be outside and you know you plan to be out in your garden today, then how about we start planning for that in advance? So starting 2 hours in advance, but up to 30 minutes in advance, how about we start drinking some water? I would love for someone to get in about 4 cups of water before they even go outside. About every 15 to 20 minutes that they're outside, make sure you're getting another cup of water in. Now, if you are in the sun and you are actively sweating for more than an hour, but definitely by the hour and a half point, you're starting to not only lose water, but you're losing some of those electrolytes. So that's when it's important to bring in some of those replacement drinks. You know, we think Gatorade, Powerade, but there's a lot of ones on the market now. Wearing good sunscreen is important. I recommend at least an SPF 30 to make sure that you're getting enough sun protection. Anything lower than that, you might not be getting the anti-cancer benefits. When we're thinking about that sun exposure, we're thinking things that are hit most with the sun. So
tops of your shoulders,
tops of your shoulders. Scalp if you don't have hair, tops of eyebrows, but really your eyes are pretty well protected. So then we're talking about our cheeks, here, our nose, because there's nothing covering that. Exactly. So we're talking really our foreheads, our noses, our cheeks, our tops of our ears, and our chest as well. That is getting that direct sun that we really need to make sure that we are covering with a wide brim hat and some sunscreen.
All right. Well, I think that really covers a lot of it. And of course, if there's any concern, somebody should go see a dermatologist, of course.
Absolutely. And some primary care doctors are able to easily evaluate lesions and treat in the office as well, but it's whoever can best treat it for you.
Right. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Chronister.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Today we are here at the Botanic Gardens at OSU, and joining me is Dr. Eric LoPresti, who's brought some of his research plants. And Dr. LoPresti, this is a new plant for me. It's sand verbena?
The sand verbenas, yes.
Tell me a little bit about these.
Okay, this is a group of wildflowers that occurs mostly in the western U.S., Canada, and Mexico. They occur as far east as Oklahoma, Texas, Nebraska, and then all the way to the coast in California.
Okay, so they can handle those hot climates, right?
They love hot climates. There's a lot of these that are native to both the Mojave and the Sonoran deserts.
Okay, well, so looking at the leaves, they kind of look almost like succulents. Tell me a little bit about the variability of some of these species that we have.
Yeah, so these grow in sand dunes across wherever sand dunes occur, coastal sand dunes, desert sand dunes, and so a lot of them do end up with somewhat succulent leaves, probably somewhat for water conservation. A lot of them end up with a kind of low growing habit where they creep across the sand dunes, and if we let these grow naturally, they'd spread really far out, whereas there are a few that grow kind of more erect and more bushy.
Yeah, this one almost looks like an onion chive from a distance.
This is one of the species that grows on really odd soils. This grows on gypsum soils in northern New Mexico, and gypsum soils often have plants that have these very tiny chive-like leaves.
Also, I was noticing some of them have very sticky leaves. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, a lot of them have sticky leaves, and that's a very common adaptation to sand in general. And the sand actually forms a coating on the leaves, and in the wild they would be entirely covered with sand, and that probably protects them both from further windblown sand. So you can imagine getting like sandblasted would be really bad for the plants in, you know, a really windy coastal or desert dune environment. And it also protects them from herbivores, because what wants to eat a sandy plant?
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about the soil type too, because you said one was grown in gypsum, but
Yeah.
I mean, these pots are not light
They're
to
really
unload.
heavy. Yeah, so these are, you know, their name makes sense. The sand verbenas, they grow in sandy soils. Almost every species grows in, you know, very sandy soils where not very much else could survive. And so when we grow them in the greenhouse, we use half play sand and half potting soil. I grow them in still water in raised beds where I put sand into the bed. So if you were really committed to it, you could grow them just about anywhere.
Okay. Well, they're beautiful plants, and they have a history too. Can you share a little bit about that history in the horticulture industry?
Yeah, so these were very popular garden plants in the 1700s, 1800s, and the first few decades of the 20th century. And then for reasons that I don't know, their popularity waned, and after World War II, they virtually were unavailable in the horticultural trade, whereas in seed catalogs before that, you could find 3, 4, 5, or even 6 species of these available. And they were, Darwin grew a couple species in his garden. Asa Gray, who many people consider sort of the foremost American botanist, grew them and studied them. And so they were really popular for a long time, and now they aren't. And I think it's time for a resurgence of interest.
Yeah, definitely. They have beautiful flowers that kind of come in a range of white and pink. Is that?
Yeah, most of the species are either white flowered, which is pretty typical for things that are pollinated by moths, or pink flowered, which can be pollinated by a lot of other an awful lot of pollinators in general. However, there are some yellow flowered species, some red flowered species, and some sort of almost purplish species as well.
Well, Dr. LoPresti, I know you've got a graduate student who's working on the native species here, so I'm going to go catch up with her and look at some of her plants as well.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Hey, Sierra.
Hi.
How are you?
Great.
Thanks for bringing these plants here. They're beautiful.
Of course, they are, aren't they?
So this is what you're studying, primarily Western Oklahoma. Kind of what's the range of, what is the species too? Tell me that first.
Yeah, Abiotic fragrans is really widespread, so it occurs from most northern Mexico all the way up to Canada even. And throughout the majority of its range, it has white flowers like this. And so one of the common names is actually snowball sand verbena for these big clusters of white flowers. But what I'm studying is this population in western Oklahoma and northwest Texas that has pink flowers.
Okay. So why do they have pink? They're the same species, right? What's the difference there? Is it the soil or what is it?
We had an undergrad, Natalie Demarest, look at soil and see if that has an effect on pink and white flowers. It doesn't seem to. So I'm focusing on the pollination ecology and evolution of these plants. And so our idea is that with the pink plants that are not only pink but also have flowers open a little bit longer into the day, that they were butterfly or other daytime pollinated.
Oh, okay.
And we seem to be seeing that already.
Okay, so the white ones attract those night pollinators maybe, the moths and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, and they're related to the 4 o'clocks that we know in the garden?
Yes.
And so they'll open and close at different times, is that?
They're the same family, and so 4 o'clocks are aptly named for the flowers that open in the evening around 4 o'clock and are closed through most of the day.
Right.
So as you can see with these white flowers, they're all closed right now. They're not open at all for daytime pollination. But looking at a lot of these pink flowers, they are still open, and so they're receptive to daytime pollinators.
Well, I know western Oklahoma can kind of be tricky with some plants, but this one looks beautiful. Maybe something that a homeowner might add to their landscape if they have that right soil.
Yeah, they love sandy soil, so if you add them to a raised bed with sandy soil, or if you just have sandy soil where you're living in western Oklahoma, you'd be set.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing this, Sierra.
Absolutely.
If you're a part of any garden club or garden society, oftentimes this time of year, midsummer, you'll start seeing that the conversation switches from
Wow, my plants are doing so well this year.
to
Oh no! What's happening to my plants?
a lot of times, midsummer, we start seeing different symptoms and signs that tell us something is happening irregular with our plants. That can include spotting, curling, cupping, irregular growth on your plants, and even, for lack of a better word, oozing. Now, if you see any of these signs and symptoms, it might mean that you have a disease on your plant.
It must be a disease. But what's a disease?
A disease is a condition of a plant that impairs normal function and is typically manifested by distinguishing signs and symptoms. Well, you have your signs and your symptoms right there on the plant. In fact, that's probably what led you to think there's something wrong with your plant in the first place. But what is the disease? Well, the study of plant disease is also known as plant pathology. Fortunately, here at OSU, we have the Plant Disease and Insect Diagnostic Lab, where plant pathologists can extract samples, look under microscopes, and use tests to determine if any pathogens are present.
A pathogen? But what's a pathogen?
A pathogen is a bacterium, virus, or other microorganism that can cause diseases. If a pathogen is found to be present, then we can better know how to handle the situation. When a pathogen is found, this is known to be a biotic disease. The word biotic comes from the Greek word bios, meaning life. Biotic diseases are those that arise due to living organisms such as bacteria, fungi, viruses, and nematodes. Sometimes you might think you have a disease, but no pathogens are found. This is known as abiotic, or absence of living organisms. These are typically a result of environmental conditions such as soil, water, light, nutrients, chemical exposure, or even temperature that leads to the stress of the plant. Abiotic diseases are also known as physiological disorders. While the most assured way to identify the disease is to send a sample to the lab, there are often clues in the landscape that will tell you whether the disease is biotic or abiotic. Clue number 1. You are seeing the same symptoms on different types of plants. For instance, nutrient deficiencies will often cause the leaves of plants to turn yellow or purple. If you saw this happening on the foliage in all your various vegetable plants, this would be a clue that it is environmental, not a pathogen. Alternatively, biotic diseases that are caused by pathogens are often host-specific and will only target their preferred host. Keep in mind, however, they may like several plants from within the same plant family. For example, you might see the same problem on your squash as you do on your melons because they again are in the same plant family. But if you also see that on your corn, then it's likely an abiotic problem. This is why crop rotation is important, but that's another segment for another day. Clue number 2. Abiotic diseases or disorders can often be found in patterns or are uniform in their appearance in the landscape. This pattern or uniform appearance is due to the area of exposure to the environmental factor that's causing the symptoms. For example, frost damage on Bermuda grass can create a unique tiger stripe pattern in the fall when the frost begins to settle on the lawn. Clue number 3. Abiotic diseases are not contagious from one plant to another. In some cases, you might find that the plant will grow out of it or return to normal once the adverse environmental conditions have been removed or corrected. Clue number 4. Think about the weather. In fact, most biotic diseases are caused by fungi, and generally speaking, they like moist conditions and moderate temperatures. Now, if we've been experiencing hot, dry conditions, aka summer in Oklahoma, then the odds are that you're seeing more abiotic symptoms than biotic symptoms. And in fact, of all the labs across the country and the samples that are submitted, anywhere from 50% to 85% of those samples come back as abiotic problems, not an identified pathogen. Now, to make matters more confusing, sometimes abiotic symptoms can lead to biotic diseases, especially if you have abiotic symptoms that are affecting the leaves, the stems, or the roots. Depending on the severity, it can deteriorate the overall health of the plant, making it more of an opportunity for those pathogens to set in. This is known as a secondary biotic disease. While there are a plethora of problems that can plague your garden this time of year, understanding whether you might have an abiotic or a biotic disease on your plants can help you determine your next step. There are a lot of great horticulture activities this time of year. Be sure and consider some of these events in the weeks ahead. For the next 2 weeks, OETA will be doing fundraising, but join us right back here on August 27th with another great show as we kick off our regional tour.
My plants are dying. Could it be a murder? Wow, my plants are doing so well this year.
To find out more information about show topics as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure to visit our website at oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. Tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater gem. We would like to thank our generous underwriter, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is also provided by Pond Pro Shop, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, the Tulsa Garden Center at Woodward Park, the Oklahoma Horticultural Society, Smart Pot, and the Tulsa Garden Club.